As I've thought through my plan of attack for fixing this guitar, I've started to notice, I can bend the sides pretty well to push this together. But one thing I realize is that it's probably better for me to reinforce the top as much as I can by fixing the cracks before I do any sort of squeezing sideways. And so the first thing I'm going to try is to do the easiest crack, which is this one right here. It's pretty tight. There's no obvious gap here. And what I'm going to do is use regular yellow wood glue. Sometimes you hear people talk about using fish or hide glue so that you can actually take something apart later. But for a crack like this, I don't ever want it to come apart, and so I'm going to use yellow wood glue and hope for the best. One thing that was really interesting is I'm sure these are probably like a $2 clamp from Harbor Freight, is that these actually fit in the F-holes if you take your time and kind of work them around. And then the other thing is that you can actually take the end of it off. And so what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to put a clamp or two in here. I'm going to use a lot of wood glue and then clamp these down. And of course the hope is that this reinforces it enough from the outside. I'm still probably going to go back and try and put some sort of cleat or something in here. But if I can get the crack the way I want it right now, I can put the cleat in later and figure out how I'm going to get that to stick in. So the first thing I'm going to actually try and do is wet this crack, and a lot of people kind of wince when you talk about wetting wood. You want to dry out the wood as best as possible when you're making guitars, but in this case I actually want the crack to swell a bit. Also, I suspect that this guitar top is so old and dried out that if I put the glue in right away, the glue would just wick in and it possibly wouldn't leave enough glue for the crack here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet down this edge to get a little bit of moisture into the wood. Then I'm going to put a ton of glue, let that sit on there for a while to kind of soak in, and then I'm going to do my clamping after like 5 minutes or so, just to let the wood kind of soak in a little bit deeper, hopefully with the glue. I just have regular warm water here. I didn't put anything in it, obviously. And so we'll try it out, see how this works. You can push this down a little bit. I want to obviously be careful. I don't want to make the crack any bigger. But yeah, I'm just going to put a little bit of water in the crack. Now what I'm doing, I put the glue in and I'm kind of just wiggling it around, trying to get it to go into the different surfaces. I can smooth it out with my finger a little bit. This is a pretty newish bottle of wood glue, and so it still has a pretty good liquid consistency. If it didn't, then I'd probably thin it down a little bit, but it's working pretty well here. Seems to be getting into the cracks. So as I said, I'm going to let this sit for maybe a couple minutes to kind of work into the crack area before I wipe off some of this excess. Wood glue has a lot of water in it, and itself is going to also make the wood expand a little bit. And so, these are all positives in this case for repair. As I said, once I get this crack stabilized, I can think about going in and putting in some little reinforcement squares, especially trying to get one at this point right here, which is where the end green comes out of the F hole. And then not sure exactly how I would put more of one down here to try and keep the crack from spreading anymore. But it's probably the case that I can get one into here. And so, you know, we'll figure that out after I get this crack set. So this is probably enough now, enough of a time to let the glue start to seep into this crack. I moved it around, wiggled it a little bit. We've got our glue. And so now I'll go ahead and just clean up some of the excess from the top. For a job like this, I just end up using these towels like they're free. Last thing I want to do is leave a bunch of glue residue everywhere. Rather than smear it around, I'll just use 5 cents worth of towels. Okay, so the squeeze out's pretty good, and so now it's time to kind of work my clamps into place. Get a little bit more of that wiped off. Work it just right. They fit in the F hole. So there you go, I got one. I got two. And so this one's pretty good. It's holding the top level, towards this. Being this is a carved top, this is a little bit kind of difficult to deal with. One other thing I probably want to do is just make sure that there's not a lot of squeeze out on the bottom here. So that the clamp comes off. And then for the second bit, I'll put my clamp up here. Try and push this edge in before I get too much pressure. And there you go. I'll just leave this to set. Probably let it set for about a half an hour, and then I'll come in and try and take the clamps off before the glue sets too much. I think that should be it though. off camera, I could see that I could push in a little bit and get some glue squeeze out. And so what I've done is taken a bar clamp here. I put some of these blue shop towels on the inside to try not to mar the finish up any more than it is. And I just lightly squeezed until I could see a little bit more squeeze out come out. And so when you get squeeze out like that, the pieces are obviously moving, you're pushing like this and the glue comes up. And so you don't want to, grill it and kind of squish everything together. But by putting a little pressure on there, it's getting this gap a little closer, and then, when the glue dries, hopefully it'll make it that much stronger. So it's been about 10 minutes. I did go back for a second application with just a cheap paintbrush and try to pack more glue into the area. And so now I'm gonna let this dry for a while. Obviously this isn't a situation where you wanna poke at it and try and get a lot of work done. And so I'll let this sit for hours before I even decide to start looking at this. This clamp ended up being taken off to make space. I think that's fine. And then I actually used a part of the broken brace from the top also as a wedge in the F-hole to try and get some side-to-side pressure using one side of the F-hole to the other, and didn't push it too hard. Hopefully it's not going to leave any sort of mark, but it's not like this guitar is in collector grade shape anyway. And so yeah, here's hoping that this the glue takes, and then we can figure out how to put a cleat in it once we're done. It's the next morning, and this crack's had a good long time to dry, and it feels pretty solid, to be honest. I think I'll go and put a cleat in it later. But for right now, I'm actually going to move on to working on this crack right here. This crack is pretty substantial in that it goes to the end of the body here. And so when you push this side in from the top, it actually opens the crack. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on this one next, so that when I go to push the sides of the body in, this actually has more strength and doesn't deform. Because right now, if I tried to push the top back together, it would actually open this crack, and that's not what I want to do. And so I'm going to use the same process as yesterday. Just going to go through and wet the crack to get some moisture into it, and then do the tight bond. I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but when I push the side here, it actually opens it up. And so I'm going to use that to my advantage here to get some glue deeper into the crack. So now that it's in the crack, what I'm going to do is just the same thing as I did before, is take this bar clamp and just gently push the crack together. And then I'm going to leave it. And from this angle, you can see, I'm putting the clamp on. It's causing squeeze out, which is what I want. That means I'm shrinking the crack down, using this bar clamp, and so I'm not going to go too much more pressure. And just wipe off the squeeze out. It's been about 5 hours since I glued up this crack, and it looks to be pretty solid. One thing I'm going to try now is, this bottom crack. And when you push on it, this area here, really at the base of the crack, has the most resistance. And so what I'm going to try and do is try and close this up like an inch or two at a time. I'm going to glue this up, leave it to set for overnight, so it really, truly has the strongest bond, and then try and kind of roll the edges in towards each other, so that, the top can be re-glued to the sides. So this is going to be the most difficult one of all. I also have this crack here, but I'm not worried about this right now. And so I'm going to use hide glue at this point because if you use regular wood glue, it's very difficult to get a joint apart. And considering how old this guitar is, and even my idea of taking the back off, I'm going to use hide glue so that if I do need to take this guitar apart at some point, it's at least easier to do. And hide glue makes it easier with just heat and a little bit of water to actually undo the glue joint. And so I'm going to use my paintbrush here to try and paint in maybe an inch or two. I'll use my bar clamp to push that together, and then I'll leave it to dry and kind of keep working an inch at a time. Okay, so I have the first part done here. I've got my hide glue in the crack. I think I'm actually going to set this up, not vertical, but at least raised up a little bit to give any gravity the opportunity to seep down into the cracks. This is the first time I've used hide glue. It's pretty viscous, and so I doubt it's going to be too runny, but nevertheless, I'll prop it up a little bit just so that the glue is only really in the area that you have wood-to-wood contact. The other thing I'm going to do, and I guess I'll just do this off camera, is I'm going to put another clamp on this here. So I have the clamps coming this way to squeeze the side in. I just want to clamp down gently to make sure the top is pressed against the kerfing on the inside, so that I don't, somehow glue it off axis. And so I'll put that clamp on, and then I'm going to let this dry, for a long time. And then I'll come back and keep trying to inch it together, 1 inch at a time. So the top separation glue up has been setting for, the whole afternoon, and doing this kind of inch at a time approach does appear to be working. I can kind of bring it in here. Maybe you can't really see. And so, this area over here is sealed up probably, a good 2 inches. I've got the clamp still on here. And so I'm gonna keep trying to work my way around. I think one area that I might be in search of a solution is actually this part here, which, it shows that in this area here that the binding is actually attached to this, but the side isn't underneath the top. And I suspect we have a situation where the binding is shrinking, or has shrunk over time. And so I think what I'm gonna do is actually to use a really sharp chisel and cut the binding right here. This will let the tension off, if there is any. It will allow me to, gently separate the plastic binding away from here, continue to push everything in, and then the tail piece is going to cover this up anyway. So even if I have a little tiny gap there, it's not something that, I'm going to be too concerned about the cosmetics of. And so I'm going to wrap up this video here. I'm going to have a second one where I show the rest of this join. I'm going to have to fix the top, the base side F-hole crack, and then there's any number of other things. There's a headstock crack. The fretboards need to the fretboard inlays need to be replaced. And so, yeah, if you like content like this, please hit like, subscribe, hit the notification button. I'm super excited about getting this arch top back into shape.